today is John Hankey. John Hankey is a researcher, historian. His forte really is, the Kennedy Assassinations. He is the producer of Dark Legacy, Dark Legacy 2, and the Assassination of JFK Jr. The third one is probably the most provocative because it's probably the least covered. Many people are familiar with the problems with the JFK assassination in 1963 and the murder of his brother in 1968. But not many people are familiar with the problems of the JFK assassination, JFK Jr. killing or murder in 1999. John, how are you doing tonight or today?
I'm very good. Good. Nice to talk to you.
Nice to talk to you.
I'm happy and excited.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the show.
Sure.
I mean, all these events are related based on your research and others. Whether it's the murder of JFK in '63, his brother 5 years later, and the death of his son JFK Jr. How do you want to approach this? Because I like to kind of address all three. So we want to do it chronologically or work backwards? What's the best way?
Well, let me start off and say that people should go to therealhistorychannel.com.
Okay.
That's my new project. I'm planning to be working on that for the next 30 years, and it doesn't start with JFK, and you can go back a long way in history. You probably don't know that I think it's 1920. There was a giant car bomb that went off in New York City, and it got blamed on the anarchists, and they rounded up all of the illegal aliens who were the leaders of the labor movement and the leaders of the Democratic Party, of the immigrant faction of the Democratic Party, and they deported them all. So things don't change very much over time. It's the same ruling elite. That ruling elite, with some changes in the membership of the dynasty, has changed, I'm sure, over the last 500 years. But I think that you can draw a continuous line. And, who knows how far it goes back. But therealhistorychannel.com, my agent says to tell you to watch Dark Legacy on Hulu. They had Dark Legacy on Netflix for like 3 years. It's just fabulous, I think, and stunning. And they now have Dark Legacy 2. They've taken down Dark Legacy, but you can watch Dark Legacy 2, The Murder of John Kennedy Jr. on Netflix. But it's better for me if you watch it on Hulu. Go to therealhistorychannel.com if you want to buy something. That's great. There's so much more information, and be sure that you remind me to talk about the new stuff. And new is in quotes. I guess it's about 2 years ago now that somebody first set me on the path to some real new developments in terms of the Bush involvement in the murder of John Kennedy. But the last time I got interviewed, I found it was very effective. Somebody asked me how I got into it, and in fact, just the natural course of events is, I think, it's interesting and enlightening and important. So I'm down with starting that way if you don't mind.
Oh, shit. Whatever you're comfortable with. So go
okay.
Right ahead.
Well, I guess I feel like I want to say, because I'm very, very, very proud of the fact that I worked for LA Unified in high school teaching English and history for 30 years in the poor schools in the city. And I learned an enormous amount from those kids. They know so much more about life than I did, and than lots and lots of people do. It's just unimaginable. But when George H.W. Bush was vice president, they began importing crack into the inner city. I don't know, Gary Webb. If you haven't seen the movie Kill the Messenger, go see the movie Kill the Messenger, which is another. I mean, we could spend an hour talking about Gary Webb, but he was a reporter for the San Jose Mercury News. He won the Pulitzer Prize for exposing how Bush and the Contras were behind all of the crack cocaine. And he got so depressed over his Pulitzer Prize that he shot himself in the head twice. Anyhow, my first year teaching, my students would tell me about how the Los Angeles police would get a member of a rival gang and handcuff him to the fence in front of the housing projects, which were immediately adjacent to the high school that I was teaching at. And they'd honk the horn, and then they'd come back in a couple of hours and pick up what was left. And I say that to say that these kids, in several ways, gave me very, very, very important education. Anyway, I've always been a very serious student. I always got very, very good grades in school. And I was perfectly happy. I was teaching, somebody showed me the Zapruder film. My best friend, this is good gravy. It's about, I was 22, I'm 64, 42 years ago. My best friend showed me the Zapruder film. And if people in your audience aren't familiar, it's in my movie very extensively. Dark Legacy, which used to be called JFK2. And if you're one of those people who can't go to a legitimate website, it's all over. As JFK2, it's all over the web. There's, I think, lots and lots of places that it's posted. And in the movie JFK, they make a huge deal out of it, and rightly so. Backward and to the left, Kevin Costner is playing Jim Garrison, who's presenting the evidence in the trial against Clay Shaw to the jury, and he shows them the Zapruder film, and you see this violent motion of Kennedy and his entire body backward and to the left, and they repeat it over and over again and say backward and to the left, backward and to the left. And so I saw that when I was 22 years old, and it just, history had always been my thing, and I'm looking at this movie saying, I don't know anything, do I? Right? I think I do. I've gone to the classes. I've studied the books. I've studied the material. I've taken the test, and I don't know anything. I have advanced degrees in bullshit. You'll pardon my saying so. And what's that good for? So I think it's fairly safe to say that for the last 42 years, I've been trying to re-educate myself. And, they're not just lying about the Kennedy assassination. I'm telling you. Let me throw this in because it's interesting as hell. But about 800 years ago, the popes wrote a document called I'm losing the precise word that they used.
The donation?
But the bequeath of Constantine.
The donation of Constantine.
The donation.
Yeah.
The donation of Constantine. And in which Constantine, and which is another really, really, really dark and horrible story. Constantine, who actually was his son, who overthrew the Roman Empire was a democracy. The emperor had to be approved by the people of Rome. It was we call it an empire and we call him an emperor, but he was elected. And if the people of Rome disclaimed him, then he couldn't. The guy didn't get to be emperor. So, anyway, without going into all of that dark history, the donation of Constantine was the excuse for the popes to claim outright ownership of all of Europe and to require all of the kings to pay them taxes, essentially. And it's a really neat and ugly exchange. And it starts in 300 AD that, there's this dark and horrible and ugly deal between the Catholic Church and the emperors, which is that we make Christianity the official religion of the empire, and we shut down any competitive churches, and we persecute any competitive religions, and you endorse us as king. And there's no longer any pretense of democracy, and it's imprinted on the British coins, Rex Dei Gratia, king by the grace of God, or Regina Dei Gratia, queen by the grace of God. The leaders, the kings, are now appointed by the Pope and are approved by the Pope and are crowned by the Pope and his emissaries. And that's where the power derives. It doesn't derive from the people as it did in Rome for, 700 years? I don't know. 300 years hardcore. And so anyway, the donation of Constantine is now accepted by all scholars as a fraud. Yeah. They've carbon dated the paper, they've studied the language, and it uses words that were not in use in the year 300. Latin words that were not in existence in the year 300 are contained in this document. So this sort of fraud goes back more than just to the Kennedy assassination, but let's start with the Kennedy assassination because that's very, very central and effective and useful because there's so much information that has been gathered. And I used to say, but if the people who are listening stick around to the end, we'll find out that we know a lot less about the Kennedy assassination than we think we do, and I think that we don't think we know that much. Anyhow, so my roommate shows me this movie, and I recognize that despite the fact that history is my most beloved subject, I don't know anything. And I went out, and at the time, there weren't a lot of books on the Kennedy assassination. You could do a very thorough study of the Kennedy assassination and be quite expert in all the available material in a couple of weeks. I mean, it's short of reading the 26 volumes of the Warren Commission. There was Mark Lane's book and a few important articles by a few important researchers, but not very much else. So, I did all that, and then I became a teacher. I did that for 10 years, and then I became a teacher after I'd educated myself. Anyway, and in 1999, when John Kennedy died, I was pretty comfortable in what I was teaching. When they released the Zapruder film, right, 25 years after it was made, there was something somewhere, I think, and perhaps not, but this is what I was told, and I haven't investigated it, that the Zapruder film was supposed to be released, and so they did. And then, I'm sitting here listening to these words coming out of my mouth and saying, well, geez, that's rather extraordinary. There's, you can't get Oswald's tax returns. 52 years later, you can't get Oswald's tax returns, but 27 years ago, they released the Zapruder film, which is, much more central, you would think, than Oswald's tax returns in any case. Because they were releasing the Zapruder film, PBS and Nova and Walter Cronkite did a hour-long program on Nova, 57 minutes, no commercials, right, with called Who Shot President Kennedy. And in this documentary, they go through and they look hard at all of the key evidence showing a conspiracy. And then Walter Cronkite tells you that you didn't see what you just saw. And so, you see, there's no verifiable evidence, no credible evidence of a conspiracy. And, he says that about 20 times throughout the video. And I would show that to my students, and then I would give them a survey, and we would see, something like 10 questions, and A, B, C, D, you agree, you're not sure, and you disagree with the and D, I wasn't paying any attention, so don't ask me. But, we could get in doing that survey, we could get a very clear, I think, analysis and representation of to what extent the class had accepted the lies that Walter Cronkite was telling, and to what extent some of the truth had managed to slip through in spite of the fact that Cronkite, it's really an extraordinary exercise, I think, that they showed you the Zapruder film. And, they stick a microphone in front of this old guy who was on the grassy knoll who describes, running up the grassy knoll in pursuit of the killer and running into a guy with a machine gun and Secret Service credentials who told him to get the hell out of there. And, the guy had a machine gun. He said, okay, and got the hell out of there. Anyway. Cyril Wecht is on talking about backward and to the left, right? And Cyril Wecht, for the people who don't know, he had been recently, at the time that they were doing this, the president of the Association of Forensic Sciences, which is the guys who do autopsies. He was the head of the organization, so very, 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 very reputable fellow. And angry, right? Spit is flying off of his lips as he's describing what a travesty it is that anyone could look at the Zapruder film and decide that that Kennedy was shot from the rear. And so I would show that to my students, and then I would show them a version in which all I did was edit out Cronkite telling you that you didn't see what you saw, and show that to the students, and then have them take the survey again. And of course, this time they're overwhelmingly recognizing what the truth is. And all right, then we'd write an essay about the various techniques that Cronkite had used to get people to not see he clearly presented evidence that had been put right in front of their face. Anyhow,
this demonstrates the importance of authority, I guess, right?
Well, and Cronkite at the time was the most trusted newsman in the country to present the utter baselessness of all of what we typically would accept as the truth. That you can't believe. This is on my list of things to do. Homeless people. If you go up and hand a homeless guy a bag with a sandwich in it, he won't eat it. He'd rather dig through the garbage and find a half-eaten sandwich in the garbage and eat it than accept one that was handed to him. And so I would say that there's a really valuable life lesson there, which is that if it was handed to you, you need to not be swallowing it. You need to be examining it very, very, very carefully. You need to bring a truckload of suspicion, right, to the dinner at which you're sitting down to consider eating this thing. Right? You don't put, not with a grain of salt, but with a truckload of the most intense suspicion. Anyway, so, I think that was a valuable lesson. I was very, very comfortable. I would also show them the tramp photos, and I don't remember what evidence I had in hand at the time that suggested that it was Hunt. I guess Dick Gregory was running around at the time saying that it was Hunt who was on the grassy knoll. And so, I would show them the tramp photos and show them pictures of E. Howard Hunt, and we would discuss it. I don't know if you look around, you can find, it's not as easy as a lot of things, pictures of Che Guevara when he went to Bolivia, and he was wearing a disguise that the KGB had put on him. And when you look at that, and it doesn't look anything remotely resembling Che Guevara, you will understand that the disguise that E. Howard Hunt was wearing on the grassy knoll, but the tramp photos do not look like Hunt. The old tramp does not look like Hunt, but some researcher, A.J. Weberman, and friends, suggested that people should look at the ear, and that the ear, the way that your ear is formed, is like a fingerprint, and everybody's ear is very, very, very different. And it's very interesting. E. Howard Hunt published an autobiography in which he shows himself sniping. And there's no explanation anywhere in the book about his career as a sniper. And you look at that, and if you have any brains at all, you think, gee, that's curious. And it has an extremely good photograph of his ear, which matches perfectly the old guy from the grassy knoll. Anyway, I was presenting that stuff to my students and feeling like I was doing a pretty good job. And I guess I knew a little bit, I had heard that the Nation magazine had published an article with this, what I at this point refer to as the Hoover memo, a memo written 5 days after the assassination by J. Edgar Hoover, in which he describes that the title of the memo is Assassination of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Well, it disturbs me that I think I'm the only remotely well-known researcher who thinks that's important, what the title of the memo was. The Nation magazine article doesn't suggest that there's anything important about the fact that the title was Assassination of President John Kennedy. All of the focus is on the fact that the last paragraph mentions that Mr. George Bush was given a report on the anti-Castro Cubans the day after the assassination. And it says who told Bush this stuff. And the guy who told Bush this stuff was Hoover's right-hand man, which means it took place at FBI headquarters. The day after the assassination, they called George Bush of the CIA into FBI headquarters, and the memo says that they told him about the anti-Castro Cubans, and the memo says they told him how they had investigated a little bit, and the anti-Castro Cubans were all just heartbroken that Kennedy was dead. Well, the fact of the matter is that Frank Sturgis, who one of the lead Watergate burglars, brags that the FBI questioned him, I don't know if it was the day after, very, very close on the assassination, and let him know that they knew that he was in Dallas, and let him know that they knew that he had guns, and let him know in Dallas, and try to coax him into bragging that he had shot the president, and said, "Oh, come on, Frank, this is Sturgis talking about his FBI interview, saying, the FBI tells him, we know you're the man, right? And if anybody had the guts and the skill to kill Kennedy, you'd be the guy to do it. Come on, tell us." So, yeah, but that's right, isn't it? And, Sturgis says that with a laugh, that, what, I'm not stupid? But Marita Lorenz describes a similar interview. Marita Lorenz, who was a member of the CIA's terror squad, as was Frank Sturgis. Gary Hemmings, who was another member of the CIA's anti-Castro Cuban terror squad, describes being interviewed by the CIA very, very shortly after the assassination. And Marita Lorenz says that she got into a station wagon full of men and guns, and they drove into Dallas the day before the assassination, and E. Howard Hunt came into the room, and Jack Ruby, and Hunt started passing out maps and money, and she looked at this and said, "Wait a minute, I'm an anti-Castro terrorist. We're not in Cuba. We're getting ready to kill somebody here. The president's coming tomorrow. I'm out of here." And she got on a plane and flew back to Miami. And then she gets interviewed by the FBI, and she's all excited to tell them about these station wagons and these guys and the names of the guys in them. And the FBI says, yeah. We don't need to hear that. We know all of that. Well, that's some very interesting stuff. And, it's one of the things I want to talk about today is how often in the JFK community, research community, we get presented with this stuff that should be a showstopper and that should become a central focus of somebody's investigation, and people look at it and they just keep walking. It's stunning to me, but the FBI apparently, well, obviously, right?
Now,
I'm sorry. The FBI knew a lot more than they were saying. Go ahead.
Yeah, Marita Lorenz. She was also didn't she pose as Castro's girlfriend?
At one point, they provided her with poison pills that she was supposed to give to Castro, and she went to Cuba, and as she tells it, and she's a human being, so I don't know that the story is 100% reliable, but she says she went to Cuba, they welcomed her, they put her up in one of the very nice, the Hilton or something, one of the nicer of the previously American-owned resort hotels in Miami, and that Castro came walking in and sat down on the bed and put his feet up and they conversed a little bit, and they had a child. I'm not sure that, I don't know if there's any dispute about that. She says they had a child. And is that true or not? I don't know. I don't know that Castro has ever addressed the subject.
And Frank Sturgis was sent to New York to kill her in 1976?
Yes.
Anyway,
Castro says to her, "You come to kill me." And she says, yes. and at that point, they were lovers, and she still had feelings for him. And her recruiting by the CIA is another long and important story. But yes, Frank Sturgis. Well, the story is that he was sent to kill her, and the story is that her daughter attacked him. And anyway.
And he was arrested by Rothstein in New York, right?
I believe so.
Yeah.
Who on the scene?
He was involved in the Son and Sam investigation. It's kind of an interesting tie-in. I don't know if it's relevant, but it's an interesting tie-in.
I don't know if it's relevant, and it's, in any case, it's a diversion from the point that I wanted to make, which is that the FBI, if they had all of that information, and I would suggest, I'll point to more of, I want to take that subject up in great detail, but in a little bit. And certainly after we finish with JFK and with JFK Jr.'s murder, I want to come back to this and talk about the unexplored showstoppers in the evidence in the Kennedy assassination. This idiot wrote this book, Case Closed. And, that was about 10 years ago, I think, that he wrote that book. And hardly a day goes by that I don't look at something and say, oh, good grief, we barely scratched the surface, and all the stuff that we think we know is wrong. There's so many people who think that they know, and I don't know of one who I think has a clue. Seriously, I don't think I know of one who I think has a clue. Anyhow, my point that I want to stomp on and have people listen, say, oh yeah, shit. The FBI knew an enormous amount. And I think that's one of the facts and one of the pieces of evidence that supports the notion that not only was Lee Harvey Oswald working for the FBI, he was working for J. Edgar Hoover. And that he had a direct line to Hoover, and that Hoover was very much in tune with what was going on. There's one insanely reliable witness that Oswald and Ruby were working together. This guy, he's a prominent attorney in Dallas, and one of his clients took him to Jack Ruby's club, and he's thinking, what the hell? Why are we going here? But he was enough of a stupid man that the woman was beautiful, and she was his client, and what the hell? He's an adult. He can go to a strip club if he wants. And this woman is taking him, and they sit him down in this prepared seat so that he can then overhear Ruby and Oswald talking loudly about the assassination. And his affidavit is in the Warren Report. This is, and was available when they published the Warren Report. This was immediately available, and one of the leading researchers, and a really important and honorable one, Penn Jones, found this and published it. Well, what the hell is that about? And, so here's another showstopper. And I don't know of anybody who has attempted to do any sort of analysis to say, well, wait a minute, what the hell does that mean? If Ruby and Oswald are having staged, loud, public conversations about the assassination, what the hell is going on? Well, right, this is a divergence from what I wanted to be talking about, from what I started off talking about. But it's not a divergence. This is it's a shortcut right down the middle of the highway that I wanted to be on, which is this notion that there are these huge showstoppers, unquestioning. This guy's one of the leading, he's a prominent Dallas attorney that I've never seen. He gets printed in the Warren Commission report. You would think that if there was anything to say against him, that somebody would have dug it up, and nobody has. Penn Jones is publicizing it as much as possible, and Penn Jones was in the area and found out what he could about this guy, and nobody that I know of has a bad word to say about him to suggest, and he tells the Warren Commission that he reported it to the state police agencies, and that was that. Well, good gravy. In addition to which, there is a Dallas police report. I don't remember who found it, and I don't remember where, but I don't think that there is an important, serious, reputable challenge to the reliability and authenticity, is the word I was looking for, of this Dallas police report that they were called out to Lee Harvey Oswald's boarding house because Ruby and Oswald were in an altercation, and they were shouting. They didn't throw anything. Nobody got hurt, and nothing got broken. But the landlady was sufficiently distressed that she called the cops, and the cops came out, and everybody quieted down. But they wrote up a police report and named Jack Ruby and Lee Harvey Oswald. Oswald and Ruby were working together before the assassination.
Which blows the lid off the lone nut theory right there, yeah.
I'm sorry, say it again?
Blows the lid off this lone nut narrative.
Well,
yeah.
but look, if you're still blowing the lid off the lone nut theory, get over it.
Some people still haven't gotten over that, so.
Well,
so yeah.
Well, you say that on the one hand. On the other hand, Walter Cronkite says that shortly after Oswald was murdered, 80% of the Americans who were polled did not think that Oswald acted alone. When he was murdered in the basement of the police department, 80% of the American people said, bullshit. Lone assassin. Bullshit. And, they didn't have a clue, excuse me, about what had happened. But they knew that they were being served up a plate of, anyway. So.
Well, that's how organized crime covers their tracks, and they're familiar with that, approach.
How does organized crime cover their tracks?
Yeah. I mean, getting rid of witnesses, the idea of, people who can talk. So when they saw that occur, they said, well, this is just too, come on, getting shot in the garage right there, being,
well, man, I'm telling you and nobody else has a clue. There's this to say. I can't remember where I saw this because I didn't make that much of it when I saw it. But a reputable member of the reporters in the basement says that when it was all over, he looked down at the ground for the puddle of blood, and there wasn't a drop. And the doctor, who I regard as, given the other statements that he's made, which are insanely incriminating of the deep state, I think this guy's reliable. Oswald bled to death. He is, one of the major artery in his leg was punctured by the bullet, and he bled to death. And they've given all the other, the guy that he was examining now. I don't think that this is too much of a divergence to talk about. And it's on the point that nobody who thinks they know anything knows anything. There was a lawsuit brought saying, we want to exhume the body of Lee Harvey Oswald. And like the homeless guy being handed a sandwich, you should be very suspicious that a judge said, yeah, okay. What? Yeah. Okay, the guy says. So they exhumed Oswald's body, and very, very interestingly, they handed it over to the guys who had put Oswald in the casket before he was buried. And these guys were technicians, and they had done, well, anyway, I want to say more about them, but I'm not sure how much I know about them. Anyway, they handed the body over to these guys who were technicians, who then x-rayed the teeth of the body that was in the casket that had been exhumed, and the x-rays that they were handed and told these are the x-rays of Oswald matched the x-rays of the body that was in the casket. Well, so what does that tell you? I can tell you what it tells you. Freaking nothing, because you don't know whose x-rays they had in their hand that were they were told were Oswald's x-rays. We don't know that. And which is getting started. And they go to do this, and they say, WTF, the head has been separated from the body. They look at each other, hey, did you cut the body off? No, I didn't cut. What the hell? Somebody cut the head off the body while it was under the ground? Okay. And so they take the x-rays, they put the body back in the casket. People in charge take it off again. And they go out to have coffee, and they're looking at each other, and one of them says, that skull we looked at, the head that we looked at, that we took x-rays of, had a craniotomy. That is to say, somebody cut the top off the head and took the brain out. And I don't know that these guys took the top of the head off and looked to see whether the brain had been taken out, but they saw that somebody had gotten a saw and cut the top of the head off. And the first guy says, when we put Oswald in the casket the first time, did he have that craniotomy? What are you going to call it? It's not. It's way more than an incision. But it's as close as I can think of a word to say it. Did he have that? And the guy says, no, I don't remember him having that. I remember him not having that. And so, who the hell is buried in Oswald's casket? I don't have a clue. Did Oswald get killed in the basement of the Dallas School Depository? I don't have a clue. Did Ruby know Oswald? He absolutely did. Was he firing blanks? Well, apparently they were friends. And all of the witnesses who had a clue, all of the girls at the Carousel Club said that Ruby was gay. Well, wait a minute. Ruby was gay. Well, David Ferry, who recruited Oswald to be in the Civil Air Patrol and who hung around with Oswald and went to Clinton, Louisiana with Oswald and Clay Shaw, was flagrantly gay, documented gay. And Clay Shaw, who had parties at his house, and, there's this witness, he's in the movie JFK at Perry. I don't remember if Perry is his first name or his last name. And, to me this is way off the main highway, but it's far from irrelevant. Says that he went to this gay orgy at Shaw's house and at Ferry's house. Well, why are Shaw and Ferry hanging out? When Oswald was a youth, right? He's 17 years old. And David Ferry took him under his wing. And when the FBI, this is me talking, this is my studied opinion, that when the FBI had been ordered by Kennedy to locate and shut down the terrorist training camps that the CIA was operating in Louisiana, it's my observation that Hoover went to Oswald and said, we want you to work for us. You're good friends with David Ferry. You and him were, like that back in the day. We want you to go down there and re-infiltrate them. And, I'll fill in that blank. And you're going to tell them, I'm going to ask my good friend Guy Bannister, who was running the CIA operation, training terrorists and arming them and using, live rounds and whatnot, out of Lake Pontchartrain in Louisiana. I'll call up my good friend Guy Bannister and tell him that we want you to infiltrate the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, and so that he should assist you in developing a leftist background. But while Bannister is helping you develop a leftist background, what you're really supposed to be doing is infiltrating his organization and locating this goddamn training camp. Anyway,
which
I should write a book. Eh?
That's what I mean. Yeah, that's. But that's the camp that was later raided by Robert F. Kennedy and the FBI, right? Correct?
Well, it was raided by the FBI, and sure, Robert F. Kennedy. Well, look.
But it seems to me like there's some sort of intrigue where Robert F. Kennedy and the Kennedys were trying to rein in mongoose, and mongoose turned around and bit them. That's yeah.
It's only friggin' obvious. That is to say, there's a book that's very, very hard to get your hands on. I think it was $450 the last time I was looking for it on Amazon. And it's called Operation Zapata. And it is a government document. It was published by the U.S. government. And it is the report, the entire report, if I'm not mistaken, that Kennedy ordered to be made of the Bay of Pigs operation. He called, this is a very important idea that I think that people need to get in their heads, so I'll say it, that when the right wing is in, holds the presidency, if you're a general and you're a right-wing ideologue, you get promoted. And if you're a general and you're not a rabid right-wing ideologue, you don't get promoted. And in the military, when you're at that rank, if you get passed over, you're retired. If you get passed over once, when you're due for a promotion and you don't get it, you're finished. And when Obama came in, God, the military was full of rabid, insane Muslim haters. Right? These guys wanted to. They thought of themselves as modern-day crusaders, whose job it was to fight global Islam, and these are the guys trying to win the hearts and minds of the people of Afghanistan. And so, please go to my website. There's an article called Barack and the Crosshairs, and it goes through all of this stuff, and I don't even want to touch on it other than to say that he called this guy Eikenberry out of retirement. Eikenberry had been a very high-ranking military officer who was passed over by the Bushes, and if Obama wanted somebody who wasn't freaking nuts, he had to call somebody out of retirement. So he called this guy in, and he made him the ambassador to Afghanistan, and Eikenberry wrote a memo, top secret, to Obama saying the government in Afghanistan is utterly corrupt. You cannot allow another American to die in defense of these guys who are scum of the earth, utterly corrupt, drug-dealing monsters. And it got published on the front page of the LA Times and the New York Times. Well, that's curious, and nobody got prosecuted for it. Nobody said peep, which says Obama released that letter because he wanted people to see that, because he didn't want to send 40,000 troops to Afghanistan. I mean, the part of the reason you should read the article is that these two individuals, married individuals, Salahi was their name, crashed a White House party celebrating the ambassador from India. Well, the ambassador from India has Muslim blood on his hands, right? He has been persecuting violently, very, very violently, and, is in conflict with Pakistan. So you would think, and, and the Pakistanis are up well past their eyebrows involved in the 9/11 terrorist attacks, right? Their contacts, you're sending Mohammed Atta hundreds of thousands of dollars, for example. Not to suggest that Mohammed Atta was involved in the 9/11 attacks other than to take the blame for them. But, so this should have been, in terms of a function that the terrorists, Islamic terrorists, if there were such a thing, should have been targeting And these guys, without any permission from anybody whatsoever, get through the gate, walk in and shake Obama's hand and shake Biden's hand and shake Nancy Pelosi's hand. And if they had had biological agents on their hands, those three people would have been dead. Anyway, Kennedy calls Maxwell Taylor out of retirement and says, investigate the Bay of Pigs, please. How the hell did this happen? And Maxwell Taylor was the highest-ranking military officer in the country. He had more stars than anybody, so that nobody could refuse to answer his questions, right? Anybody who said, well, my supervisor said, well, I outrank your supervisor, so forget what he says Maxwell Taylor. You have to answer the question. And, man, there's drama in this thing because they're doing this investigation, and Alan Dulles is sitting right there. Well, Alan Dulles is the guy who Maxwell Taylor outranks, right? And who gave the order, don't tell these guys anything. He's sitting right there, and these guys are looking back and forth between, well, I wrote that part, looking back and forth between Alan Dulles and Maxwell Taylor, and they're answering the questions. They went to Kennedy and said, we want to invade Cuba. And Kennedy said, oh, hell no. And the exact quote is, no D-Day style invasion. And then the CIA went ahead and had a D-Day style invasion. And when they were done, they had Operation Mongoose. Well, Kennedy hadn't authorized Operation Mongoose. Kennedy was not a rabid anti-communist. He and Robert Kennedy had great sympathy. Well, Robert Kennedy's background was beating on the mafia, right? Was hating on the mafia, was persecuting the mafia, was going after the mafia. People don't know that had been Robert Kennedy's background immediately before the assassination. Immediately before Kennedy won the election, before he became Attorney General. And you can find all sorts of people who knew him saying, oh, yes, he had a fierce hatred of the mafia because, he'd had his nose rubbed in the ill doings in preparing the cases against these guys. The Kennedys, Jack Anderson said the Kennedys put thousands of mafiosi in prison. And I've never investigated that quote, but I've never seen anybody suggest that Anderson would have been telling anything but the truth about it. In any case, they would have had great admiration for Fidel Castro, the populist who unseated the mafia and handed Havana back to the people of Cuba. They would have had enormous sympathy for him. So, not to say that the people who murdered Kennedy haven't done everything they can to try to hang all of these lies, all of these crimes against the Cuban people around Kennedy's neck. I don't think he authorized any of them. And certainly you have it there in black and white in an official government document that he said, do not invade Cuba at the Bay of Pigs with a D-Day style invasion. He said, if you want to get some canoes and smuggle these guys onto shore in the dead of night and slip them up into the hills, go ahead. But don't try to establish a beachhead with planes and troop carriers and, all this other D-Day style stuff, which is what they did, which is why Kennedy fired Alan Dulles and Richard Bissell and Cabell. I'm forgetting his first name, General Cabell, let's call him that. Anyway.
His brother was the mayor of Dallas, right?
I'm sorry?
His brother was also the mayor of Dallas.
The brother of the mayor of Dallas. Mm. So, where we were going with this, does anybody remember?
Well, we're making the George Bush.
It came back to me in a flash. I'm sorry, go ahead.
You're spelling it, you're creating, describing the political milieu in which the assassination occurred. Of course, you have the anti-Castro Cubans. You have Kennedy's conflict with the CIA.
I was trying to describe the milieu in which Oswald was approached by the J. Edgar Hoover and said and told. So the Bay of Pigs happened, and I am not a huge fan of John Kennedy. He should have gotten down on his knees and begged. They killed 10,000 Cubans at least. He should have been begging forgiveness for this horrible crime that had been perpetrated against the Cuban people. And he did, he paid reparations. But I think everybody's observation was that he paid reparations more or less at the point of a gun. Well, he didn't. He could have launched any. I don't know what any. Set that aside. They launch Operation Mongoose. So there are further provocations. And, Operation Mongoose is run by Nazis inside the U.S. military, but, people who are very, very, very firmly established as being serious Nazi sympathizers. Well, I don't think it's too much to say about JFK that he was, when he went to World War II, it wasn't with misgivings about whether or not fascists and fascism should be smashed. He was not a Nazi, and so you think he would put Nazis in charge of terrorizing the Cuban people, because that's all Operation Mongoose was. I don't think there's any question about it if you look at the details. These were all, 100% of them, terrorist operations, and so Castro takes these attacks, and he goes into Khrushchev, and he says, look, the United States invaded us once, and, I have my operatives in place, and these guys are doing everything they can to get ready to invade us again. Give us missiles. And Khrushchev says, oh, shit, well, right, the U.S. has missiles in Turkey, right on our borders, right, 20 minutes away from Moscow. We're going to put some missiles in Cuba 20 minutes away from Washington. It's fair's fair. After the missile crisis, and the missile crisis scared the crap out of everybody, most especially John Kennedy. And, he didn't want to revisit that situation. And so they're trying to make a peaceful rapprochement with Cuba. And the CIA is continuing with this mongoose crap. And Kennedy had ordered it shut down. And Khrushchev calls him up and says, hey, dumbass, you have to get control of these people. They're still, because Castro is screaming at me, says Khrushchev, you got to do something about this. And Kennedy calls in Hoover and, screams at him. Well, I'm making that up, the part about Kennedy screaming at Hoover. I don't know what exactly he said to Hoover, but he most surely told him, you have to make it so that Castro stops screaming at Khrushchev, and so that Khrushchev stops screaming at me. You have to shut down these entirely illegal by international law and illegal by American law and unauthorized by me. In fact, I have ordered the CIA for years now to stop this crap. You find them and you shut them down. And the next thing you know, Oswald is meeting with, he's in New Orleans, meeting with customs agents who are the guys who are responsible for what goes in and out of the country. And what they're interested in going out of the country is these weapons and terrorism. And so he's involved with customs, and I'll come back to it. But I was looking at the Kennedy assassination, and I thought I was doing a pretty good job. And I had my head up my ass in terms of thinking that I had a clue about what was going on. But I was teaching this stuff to my kids. And, I'm a very, very dedicated teacher. I'm such a dedicated teacher. Saturday morning, I'm going to a meeting of other dedicated teachers to talk about how we can do a better job doing what we're doing, which is, some very complicated stuff, trying to teach kids who have just insane obstacles in the path to become well-educated and successful and literate and so on. And I'm driving, and it's probably 7:45 in the morning, and I've got the radio on, and I hear that John Kennedy's plane is missing. John Kennedy Jr.'s plane is missing. And I went to Catholic school for 18 years, not 18 years, 12 years. But I'm a hardcore atheist, I think. But, and I said a prayer for him in spite of my my rejection of Catholic orthodoxy. I said a prayer for John Kennedy, and I went on to this conference and, was deeply involved in this stuff and, really similarly life and death issues, only life and death issues regarding our students. And I'm done with it, and I go home to my wife, and we go to our favorite restaurant, and I look up, and they have a TV on with the sound off, and I see little boats crisscrossing the water, and I see the caption about JFK Jr., and, this is 15 hours later, and I see that, and I say, oh, my God, he's dead. And then Dan Rather's face comes on the screen.
Now, why is that upsetting?
Because Dan Rather, for 25 years, was the only individual who was allowed to see the Zapruder film, and he saw it on Sunday morning after the assassination, and he ran to the studio. He saw it at the offices of Zapruder's lawyer, if I'm not mistaken, and he ran to the studio, and he's breathless on the air with Walter Cronkite, if I'm not mistaken. Oswald has either just been shot or he's about to be shot. And he says, yes, I've seen the video. And he says, the limousine didn't stop. And it's a funny thing for him to say. And he says that the president's head clearly jerks forward. And you can find that. I mean, if you Google Dan Rather head jerks forward, you'll find an MP3 of his recorded interview with Walter Cronkite on that morning, giving this very, very clear disinformation. And here he is on the screen, and they brought the dinner, and I couldn't eat it. I was literally physically ill. I could not eat the most delicious food I know of because everything in my visceral system was telling me that the guys who killed John Kennedy Sr. were back on the warpath and that they had murdered John Kennedy Jr. And so then I start assembling all of this evidence that John Kennedy Jr. was murdered. And I want to say, look, go find the video and watch it, because I don't want to go into all of the evidence, but I'll talk about it a little bit, and feel free to ask any questions if you care to. But there's a couple of central pieces, and one of them is that John Kennedy Jr. always flew with a flight instructor. There were several really, really critical reasons why he would have flown with a flight instructor. It was a new plane. It was a powerful plane. It had advanced avionics, that is, aviation systems on it. It had autopilot. It would have landed itself at the target airport. It would have landed itself at the target airport without him having had to do anything. And it had a beacon that would have located his position for anybody looking for the plane, for the FAA, to within, I talked to the head of the Coast Guard, to within 3 feet. And so he needed a flight instructor who was familiar with the plane to teach him all of these bells and whistles. He was on crutches because he had been flying this tiny little airplane 2 months before and had broken his foot, and they had taken the cast off the day before. Well, it's one of my favorite arguments is anybody who's married will tell you that there's no way his wife would have gotten on that plane with him with a broken foot because he crashed his plane 2 months before. She would not have gotten on that plane with him if he didn't have a flight instructor.